I think one of the most challenging things about being a person who is becoming is that people will always see your potential before you do, you know? And I just think there's really something about being put on a pedestal. I've experienced this as a woman. I'm beautiful and, I'm ambitious and I'm on my way, but by no means have I arrived. You know what I mean? And I mean that like humbly. You know what I mean? When I say there are so many pieces that are moving together, but, for myself, I think who I am and what my phenotype communicates to people is some level of privilege, right? I'm thin. Sometimes I've heard people consider me light skinned. I'm not light skinned. I'm brown skinned, but I don't mean to, sit here and do a paper bag test. Okay. Jesus Christ. People see me and the expectation is ease. The expectation is support. The expectation is privilege. And my life does not align with any of these expectations. And I think as I've gotten older, this is what I'm met with. And so relationships have been incredibly challenging. I mean, I won't even say as I've gotten older because it's always been there. I've met, people say, oh, you're stuck up. And granted, when I was young, I might have been a little bit of a haughty something, I doubt it. I was bullied. I was insecure because I never lived up to those expectations. I was pretty, but I was a nerd. I was pretty, but I was like in the realm of academia. That was my jam. I was pretty, but I played soccer. I didn't cheer. I wasn't a cheerleader, even though I could have been. I didn't have the confidence, but my thing was soccer. I'm sweaty. It's shin guards. It's, you know what I mean? So I just think, what do you do with those expectations? Because I don't think it ever changes, and I just think there's really something in that. And I guess I'm just coming on to kind of raise a sense of awareness, for my sisters out there, who just don't exist, and maybe this isn't even a collective issue. Maybe this is just an individual personal thing that I got going on, but I will say it's incredibly difficult to connect with people who have fantasies. And I don't think that we ever really grow beyond that. And that's not a Black thing. That's a societal thing. We never really grow beyond the fantasy of a person. And I think as someone who has continuously, been pedestalized, it's tough. It's really, really tough. And it's also unsafe, oftentimes emotionally, I'm in spaces where it's just not safe because people aren't really seeing me, or they're seeing an idea of me. And I think when people are living within a fantasy, nothing that you do can really erase that illusion. It has to be something that is like super ultimate crash and burn for them to really get it, but I do notice it. And I guess I just wanted to come on and acknowledge that. And if you can relate, leave a comment below. Peace. Because it's this thing of like, people do expect this sense of ease. And I know I said peace, but like people expect this thing of ease from you. And so what people don't know about me is that everything that I am has been like, and I'm not saying like self-made, you know what I mean? Like I'm not trying to come from that standpoint, because it has been the writers, it's been the authors, it's been the women that were just standing across the street, like have been my muse, have been my mentors. Life has been, that guidance. It's been God, but I don't have a life of ease. You know what I mean? I don't have a life of ease. I don't have that level of support that I think, had it been there, I think I would be so much further along, And so when I say self-taught, self-made, I'm more so saying like, hey, listen, I'm actually someone who doesn't have that life of ease and that, and so I just think when I meet people, what's incredibly disheartening is that I can't live up to the expectations and to the fantasy, right? Because when you've had to survive and you've had to accumulate resources on your own and do things on your own, life inevitably gives you a little bit of rough edges, And so I just think what I typically find is I'm connecting with people and they may be in the space of academia, but they come from a very privileged background. And though we're speaking the same language, our backgrounds don't align. You know what I mean? This is not my space. This is in my person. They're not I say they're speaking my language, but they don't really speak my language, because I am a little bit more hard pressed. You know what I mean? I have ventured through the fire and the storm and many storms, and so I don't necessarily connect with those academics who have had the parents who've been there and who have been the catalyst for their love of learning. I have the person who was like, hey, listen, I was alone and books became the haven. I just picked up a book. I started reading one day. I loved what it did for my mind in terms of like imagination. I loved how reading certain things could put you years ahead, you know, in terms of like knowledge. And that's just where it started, you know? And so it's incredibly difficult. And I think even when I meet with women, you know, women who may have achieved that little bit of that soft life, and though I may be thin, and I'm more so speaking about everybody's projections onto me, I personally do not view thinness as a rite of passage. You know, being thin back in the day, you used to get bullied for being skinny, you know, and even still to this day, I just don't think that thinness means anything. You know, that's just me personally. It could be, you know, because I am thin, or I just don't feel like, you know, but I also don't want to negate anybody's experiences who maybe are trying to achieve thinness, or, you know, struggle with, you know, being something other than. So I don't want to speak too much to that, but I'm just going to let you know, for me personally, I don't care. So anyway, it's difficult. You know, it's difficult because, like I said, when you connect with those women, they don't really see you. You know, for them, it's about the aesthetics. You know, the bonding experience with these type of women is about the aesthetics and the superficialities, right? So though y'all both pretty, it's like they don't connect with you, you know, mentally, physically, emotional, not physically, well, mentally, mentally, I don't know why I was going to say psychologically, but I said physically, but it's like mentally, it's the same thing. So they don't connect with you mentally, spiritually, or emotionally, you know, and so the values don't align. So it's just incredibly difficult. And I guess that's just me venting. Peace.